Welcome to Living the Smarter Science of Slim, where we provide a scientifically proven lifestyle for long-term health and fat loss by eating more and exercising less, but smarter.
Eat smarter, exercise smarter, live better. I am so ready for that.
Hey everyone, Jonathan Bailor, Carrie Brown, Living the Smarter Science of Slim. Carrie Brown, everyone's waiting. They've been waiting all week long. Myself and the millions of Smarter Science of Slim listeners want to know how you're doing.
I have some serious issues today, Jonathan.
Good issues or bad issues?
Well, the first one, my major issue is bad.
Okay. Folks, we're not going to have too much time for the Smarter Science of Slim today, but Carrie, go ahead. Emotional health is also important.
It's your shirt.
Oh, what's wrong with my shirt?
It says Kellogg's Fruit Loops. We don't eat Fruit Loops, Jonathan.
It's ironic. It's ironic. Yes, I am wearing a Fruit Loops t-shirt today, but it is all in good fun.
The good part of the t-shirt is it has a very happy toucan on it.
It does.
Yes.
It does.
All right, we'll go with that. I'm fine. Let's talk about science.
Let's talk about science. All right, well, I think this week we just need to pick up where we left off last week. Glad we could start on a jovial note this week, because last week it was a little bit of a downer podcast, maybe not too much, but we definitely reviewed a lot of the bad science that has gone into these dietary guidelines, which has led us down the path of unparalleled obesity and sickness. I mean, frankly, before these guidelines came out, it's actually kind of ironic and sad, before we were pressured into quote unquote being healthy, we were a lot healthier. Which is kind of ironic, right? If you think about 2-3 generations ago, no one tried to be healthy. They didn't. I mean, you see what I'm saying? They didn't try to be healthy, and they were healthier. Whereas today, we're obsessed with health, and we're sicker than we've ever been. So there's some interesting questions about how that happened. We went over those studies last time. We saw a big part of it was this fear of fat. Technical term is called lipophobia, where we fear consuming natural sources of fat. And there's two big reasons that has happened, Carrie. We talked about the bad science last week, but there's two other higher level reasons. One is the idea that by consuming fat, we will overeat, and we'll disprove that. The other one is that by eating fat, we'll do something bad to our cholesterol. And I don't know if we'll have time for that this week. I think we'll cover cholesterol next week. But today, let's focus on this whole concept of if you eat foods containing fat, you will overeat, because that's just not true.
I just had someone in my office the other day came in, and I have this big basket of nuts and for snacks. And she came in and I said, have some nuts. And she said, no, they have a lot of fat in them.
And they do. She's right. They do.
And so I gave her the elevator pitch for the Smarter Science of Slim, because I'm like that. But yeah, it was interesting. That was her first reaction to nuts, which are good, right? Was I can't eat nuts, they're fat, and then proceeded to eat.
I actually love that you brought up that example, Carrie, because that will tie right back into the science we'll talk about here. Sure, well, let's just jump into it, because that's a perfect segue. So the major objection to consuming dietary fat, or one of them, is that the idea that doing so will lead to overeating. And the reason people sometimes think this is fat contains more calories per gram than the other two macronutrients. So 3 macronutrients, protein, carbohydrate, fat. Protein and carbohydrate contain approximately 4 calories per gram, whereas fat contains 9. Alcohol contains 7, as a side note. So people are like, well, if you eat more fat, you're going to eat more calories, and then you're going to get fat. But hold on a second. We know, the science shows, we talked about this in previous podcasts, that how much we eat is determined by the calories satiety, and that we know that a calorie satiety is determined, or a food satiety is determined by the amount of water, fiber, and protein we consume. You'll notice that fat is not in that list. So a food that is high in water, high in fiber, high in protein, and also contains some fat is going to be very satisfying, whereas a food that is dry, low in fiber, and low in protein, and that contains fat will not be satisfying. The point here is that fat is not the determiner of whether or not a food fills us up quickly and keeps us full for a long time. The determiner of satiety is water, fiber, and protein. So if we are trying to avoid foods that predispose us to consuming too many calories, the idea is not to avoid foods containing fat. The idea is to avoid low satiety foods or dry, low fiber, low protein starches and sweets. So I'm not sure how the whole, well, there's a bunch of fat in it, so it's going to make us overeat, is just false, right? This is the whole concept around once you pop, you can't stop. Because these salty snack foods that are rich in carbohydrate, these are the things we have a hard time not overeating. Oftentimes, if you pair fat with sugar or you pair fat with starch, then it becomes easy to overeat. But if you just eat fat in its natural state as a whole food, for example, with some protein, maybe in some organic grass-fed beef or in seafood or with some nuts, it's very difficult to overconsume that because it's accompanied by so many high satiety calories.
It's also, though, I think we've been, as we've pointed out over the last however many podcasts we've done now, that we've been bombarded with the notion that fat is what makes us fat. Mm-hmm. And I think, on a very, very simple level, it makes sense to people that if you eat fat, you're going to store it as fat, and so you're going to get fat. So I think, all of what you've just said, plus the fact that we've had this fat brainwashing, people just automatically equate eating fat with getting fat. And, we know that that's not necessarily true.
And Dr. Ravenskov, actually a famous researcher in the cholesterol and dietary fat arena, actually speaks to that point directly, quoting him directly here. The idea that you become fat by eating fat is just as silly as to say that you become green by eating green vegetables. Obviously, it's a little bit silly, but I mean, it does kind of speak to that point a bit about how this concept of just because you eat fat, we're led to believe that we become fat. It is not true. Just like eating green vegetables doesn't make us green. The things that make us fat are the foods that trigger overeating, and these foods have been proven to be low in water, low in fiber, low in protein. You'll notice fat isn't even in that equation, and foods that cause a negative hormonal reaction in the body, or a hormonal reaction that predisposes us to store fat rather than to burn fat. If you want to learn about this, check out Gary Taubes' work. He's gone into it in detail, where carbohydrate, especially starches and sweets, are the fuel that trigger the body to store rather than to burn fat. Eating fat can very easily just be burned. Whereas if we create a hormonal environment in our body using abundant starches and sweets, again, low satiety foods, this is when we store fat, not when we consume fat.
That's awesome.
Is that awesome?
Do you know why it's awesome?
Why is it awesome?
Because fat tastes fabulous.
And there's a reason it tastes fabulous. We need to eat it. It's an abundant source of nutrition. Many things that we need. An important thing to keep in mind is that, like we talked about before, there's essential fatty acids. There's substance found in dietary fat that we must eat or our health suffers. It's critical to a healthy hormonal environment that we eat whole food, natural sources of fat. Again, this doesn't mean we all necessarily have to go on a 70% ketogenic diet, 70% fat ketogenic diet, but it does mean that, going back to your example, Carrie, when someone sees a bowl of snacks available and they're hungry, if they have to choose between a source of moderate protein, low sugar, low starch, high fat, such as nuts or some seeds, or they can choose a low fat, high sugar, high starch snack bar. The problem is we've been led to believe that 100-calorie snack bar is what we should choose. But what that's going to do is, one, it's not going to satisfy us at all. So we're probably going to eat 4 of them. And then we're going to drink a soda because we're still not going to have any energy. And we will end up overeating. And in fact, this has been substantiated by a massive amount of data where the fear of fat and fearing it because we think if we eat it, we're going to overconsume food has actually led to us eating more. If you actually look at the data, and again, I'll post these graphs like I always do in the show notes, since the dietary goals document that we talked about 1 or 2 podcasts ago was released in the late 70s, the ratio of carbohydrate and fat in our diet has changed dramatically. Specifically, the percent of our daily intake coming from carbohydrate has gone up tremendously, and as has our total intake of calories. So we have been eating more, but we've been eating more, many would argue, because we've shifted our diet away from high satiety natural foods, which contain fat, to low satiety, potentially fat-free, or not potentially, low satiety, fat-free starches and sweets. This has resulted in us needing to eat more calories in order to feel fuller, and because of this, we are consuming more calories. The percent of calories from fat in our diet has dropped continuously for the past 40 years, while our rates of obesity and total caloric intake have increased. So again, this may seem a little bit obvious now when we look at it this way, but to say that we will avoid overeating by reducing the amount of high satiety, potentially naturally fattening foods, and replace them with low satiety starches and sweets is nonsense. You don't avoid overeating by eating more low satiety foods. That's the way you encourage overeating, not the way you avoid it. So the key thing we need to do is not focus on high fat, low fat. We need to focus on high satiety, high nutrition, low aggression, low efficiency, the 4 factors that determine calorie quality that we talked about earlier. Those foods may or may not contain fat.
Well, and I love the science, but for me, the key point here, being someone that just loves food, that the key point is that not only does eating low fat not make you lose weight, it also tastes horrible.
Absolutely.
So for me, what you've just said equals, you can eat good fats and you can enjoy them because they taste good and you don't have to worry about putting on weight. And that for me, for all the science, for all the fabulousness that you've just explained,
absolutely,
for me, that's where it's at.
And just to build off that, Carrie, I love that because we, as humans, are genetically programmed to crave essentially 3 tastes. I forget the gentleman who wrote the book, The End of Overeating, goes into this, Kessler maybe, goes into this in detail, talks about our craving for sweet, our craving for salty, and our craving for fat. And what research shows is that, again, we can go sane, we can enjoy fat, we can even enjoy salty, we can enjoy sweet, but that's the one we need to watch out for the most. So of those 3 things, again, a lot of these diets we've heard about in the past, it's just kind of like we lose all of those. It's just like you're eating bran this, and it's just foul. Whereas what the research actually shows is you can enjoy salty things. You can enjoy the taste of fat. Sweet is the one we need to be careful for, but 2 out of 3 ain't bad.
Right.
So there's a lot of options available to us. And Carrie, one other thing that I wanted to touch on, because I mentioned it in passing and some readers may have picked up on it, and that was, I mentioned, again, the whole point of this low-fat campaign. It had to do with cholesterol, and we'll get to that next podcast, but also had to do with the fear of overeating. And since we have, as a culture, successfully reduced the percent of our calories coming from fat, we have done that successfully if we look at the data, we've seen a corresponding increase in the total calories we're consuming, which makes sense, right? Because we have shifted high satiety foods out of our diet in favor of low satiety starches and sweets. But now people might say, Jonathan, you have just stated, and the data supports, I'll bring the data up here in a second, that we are consuming more food now than we ever have before. Doesn't that get back to the very early podcasts? Well, Jonathan, he's saying it's about calories in, calories out, because we're consuming more calories now and we're heavier now. There's the explanation. Why did you even create those first 5 podcasts about the set point? Do you wonder that, Carrie?
No.
No, Carrie doesn't wonder. Well,
yeah, but here's why I don't wonder. Because I'm trapped in a small room with you every week listening to all this stuff. So I no longer wonder that.
All right, I appreciate that. Well, for listeners who do not have the opportunity to mock my clothing and spend interpersonal time, let me quickly dispel which may be a fear or a potential critique of the Setpoint research. So this is a great research study done by 2 researchers at Yale. They use a technique known as mathematical decomposition to analyze a bunch of data, and these are researchers Duffy and Popkin at the University, it's not Yale, it's the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. And they discover that the number of calories consumed per person per day increased from about 1,800 calories per day in 1977 to about 2,400 calories per day in 2006. So that's a gradual increase of approximately 600 calories per day per person. So you could imagine someone just listening to the last 90 seconds of this podcast and concluding, well, there you go, proof, metabolism works like math, more calories in means we gain weight, and that's just what happened. Off to the treadmill to exercise more because that increases calories out. But hold on, this is actually an incredibly powerful point to make, and again, we really need to get the whole manually balanced calories in, calories out of our mind, because until that's gone, for example, we're still going to fear fat. Because you're right, fat contains more calories than protein or carbohydrate. So let's dig a little bit deeper here. Let's actually do some calorie math and see what Dr. Duffy and Dr. Popkin's data show. So by 2006, we were eating about 570 is the actual number, more calories per person per day than we were in 1977. Let's assume that we gradually worked our way up to 570 over the course of those decades. So for the 29 years between 1977 and 2006, let's say on average, each person ate 300 more calories per person per day, because it's probably a gradual climb, so let's average it out. So let's do some math here, Carrie. 300 calories per day, per person, times 365 days in a year equals 109,500 more calories per person per year. Now we have 29 years, so we multiply that number by 29, and we get 3,175,500 more calories consumed per person between 1977 and 2006. Super simple, but hold on. There's 3,500 calories in a pound of fat. So let's continue our metabolism math experiment here. 3,500 calories in a pound of fat. Take that abundance of calories the average person consumed, 3,175,500, divide it by 3,500 calories in a pound of fat, and we should have all gained 907 extra pounds of fat.
Wow.
So, I mean, and that's not debatable, it's not arguable, that's math. The data show we consumed more calories, correct. In fact, we've consumed well over 3 million more calories per person per year than we did historically over the course of 29 years. However, if it was just about calories in, calories out, we would have all gained about 900 pounds. We haven't. We're definitely heavier, but we're not even close to as heavy as we would be if metabolism worked like math. Metabolism doesn't work like math, and in fact, the reason we don't weigh 900 pounds more and only a teeny tiny fraction of that, like we're heavier, but we're less than 10% heavier than as we would expect if it was just about math. The reason for that is the set point.
We're eating relatively more than 10% extra calories than we were.
Yeah. Oh, yes.
But we're only 10% heavier.
Exactly. Well, not even 10. I mean, we're not 90 pounds heavier.
Right.
We're not even that. We're maybe 5% more heavier on average. So that right there, actually, instead of sort of arguing against the set point, is a pretty compelling argument for the set point, because our body was doing its damnedest to regulate us and actually did a pretty decent job in the face of 3 million plus extra calories. We only gained, a tiny fraction of weight compared to what we should have gained. So pretty interesting data there. The point, again, is the reason I mentioned that in this podcast specifically is it's not about manually regulating calories in, calories out. And since it's not, we do not necessarily have to worry about the amount of calories in a gram of fat, because one, consuming fat satisfies us. And because it satisfies us and it's a component in high satiety food, our body will automatically prevent us from going bananas with it. The thing that our body goes bananas with are dry, low fiber, and low protein starches and sweets. Now, people might say again, but potato chips, they're fattening, French fries, they're fattening, and it's hard for me to stop eating them. That's right. It's paired with starch. Or cake, fattening paired with starch and sugar.
But it's the starch that's
It's the starch
problem.
and the sugar. But there is one other area which people may bring up, and they should, which is nuts. Personally, if you put a freaking 1 pound bowl of almonds in front of me, I could eat the entire bowl. And that's too many calories. That's 4,000 calories right there. So the key, again, remember, satiety, water, fiber, and protein. So when we do enjoy fat, we should enjoy it in the context of other foods or foods that are high in water, fiber, and protein. So you want to enjoy some fat, make sure you're getting water, fiber, and protein. Make sure you're getting some meat, some seafood, some non-starchy vegetables along with those nuts, and you'll be fine. You won't overeat them. Don't eat them alone.
Do you know my favorite line in your book?
Wow, what is? I want to know. I'm actually very curious as an author.
Eat as much cheese as will keep you happy.
Oh yes, I remember. That is
and you
in
know
there.
What? I love that line.
Eat as much cheese as will keep you happy.
Keep you happy, and you know.
Yes.
So when I'm standing in front of the fridge, or I'm thinking about what I want to eat, and I often think about cheese because I love cheese, and I know there's apparently I heard a thing on the radio the other day that said it was the thing that most people find hardest to give up when they're trying to lose weight is cheese.
Interesting.
And so I'm a big cheese fan. Every time I'm in that moment where I'm going, oh yeah, but I can't eat cheese because it's fat and it'll make me fat, I think about that line in the book where it says, eat as much cheese as will keep you happy. And so, yeah, that's my favorite line in the book. But I do know to pair it with, something
Absolutely.
else. But I don't have any issues now. If I'm having a cheese moment and I've got this yummy,
cheese moment.
yummy veggie-filled omelette going on and I'm having a cheese moment, I will grate cheese all over that puppy and I'll just have a fabulous time. But I no longer have that, that, oh my God, I can't put cheese on it because that'll make me fat. I just don't have that anymore.
And hopefully you also don't afterwards feel guilty or bad like you've done some sort of sin.
Hell no.
Well, and folks, some other helpful tips when it comes to cheese and even fat in general. So some cheese, generally speaking, the lighter the color of the cheese, the more sane it's going to be. So that's just something to keep in mind. Things like a mozzarella or a Parmesan is more sane than a cheddar. Also, if you are going to do cheese, make sure it's as minimally processed as possible, right? Like if it comes out of a can, if there's aerosol involved, that's just don't do that. All right.
Yeah, on several levels. If it comes in an aerosol, don't do that.
And then really sane options for cheese. Cottage cheese is cheese. And for example, if you make scrambled eggs, anything with eggs, if you put cottage cheese into it, the water actually evaporates out and it really gives those eggs a wonderful cheesy taste. You can even melt cottage cheese. You use cottage cheese in dishes like you would use a ricotta cheese. Wonderful taste. I also love using Parmesan cheese because it has such a strong flavor to it. A little goes a long way. And that's another recommendation is try to stick with lighter colored cheeses with really strong flavor, because the stronger the flavor, the more you're just like, okay, I've got my fix. It's very strong.
Talking about Parmesan, you just reminded me, one of my in fact, it may be my most popular recipe on my blog, my most popular SANE recipe on my blog, was the Parmesan squash. Which ended up...
it's like au gratin potato substitute. It was just like...
And the people that I made it for were like, oh my God, I feel like I'm eating au gratin potatoes.
Tell us a little about the SANE squash au gratin potato substitute.
It was squash instead of potatoes.
Okay.
And then I made a very light sauce, if you will, which I added a cup of almond meal to give it some body.
Absolutely.
But it also had some other good stuff in there, and then I layered it with Parmesan and grilled it in the oven, and they just love this thing. I've had more hits on that recipe than I think any other recipe I've ever posted.
And then you served it with a main dish of a meat or
I
a
don't
seafood.
remember, but we had a chicken dish and a big salad and this Parmesan squash, and the people I made it for were just like, I don't even miss potatoes. This is just like eating potatoes au gratin.
I love it. You've got the protein, you've got the water, you've got the fiber. You paired it with the almond meal, some cheese. It's a rich, delicious meal, and you enjoy it, and you're full, and you don't feel deprived. And if we're going to do this for the rest of our life, which again we have to, if we ever stop doing what we are doing to achieve health, again, we're going to backslide, so we have to make sure it's sustainable. That freaking au gratin potato substitute sounds pretty daggone sustainable to me.
It was delicious, and you would never, if you didn't know about this and I served it to you, you'd never think you were on a diet. Or if you were on a diet, you'd look at it and go, taste it and go, I can't eat that.
I can't eat this.
Like,
You can. Yeah, you absolutely can. So this is awesome. This is awesome, Carrie. So no avoiding nuts in favor of starches and sweets. No avoiding fat in favor of starches and sweets. Enjoy whole foods. Whole foods contain fat. And the data for this is all over. I'm going to post a bunch of charts up in the show notes that show the inverse relationship between our effort to avoid fat, substitute in starch. Obesity then goes up precipitously. Diabetes goes up. And this is not some theory. This is known. For example, even the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention reported, quoting, during 1971 and 2000, a statistically significant increase in average energy intake occurred. Okay, we've talked about that, but they follow with, the increase in energy intake is attributable primarily to an increase in carbohydrate intake. That is absolutely key. And let's keep going on here. That was the CDC. Now we've got the USDA, the actual people who told us to avoid natural foods containing fat in favor of unnatural starches and sweets. They've gone on record saying that since the 1970s, the major dietary trend has been, quoting, greatly increased consumption of carbohydrate. They actually found that starch consumption has increased by nearly 60 pounds per person per year, and that sweetener consumption has increased by nearly 30 pounds per person per year. Carrie, that's 90 additional pounds of low quality, low satiety food every year. And why are we eating that? Because we cannot tolerate hunger. So if we eat low satiety foods, starches and sweets, we will eat more of them.
But we're also eating that because we've been bombarded with pseudoscience that
Absolutely.
says this is low fat or this is healthy or this
Exactly.
is, so we're doing what we've been led to believe is a good thing.
And a couple.
So it's not
absolutely.
just that we're kind of ravenously hungry and we're greedy. It's not. A part of it is that we've been brainwashed into believing that this stuff is good for us, so therefore we can eat whatever we like because it's healthy.
I love it. Yeah, so that's a great distinction. One, the point I was making is that we eat more of these foods because we have to in order to feel full. And Carrie, what I hear you saying is that we're also intentionally eating more of these foods because we think they're going to help our health.
Right.
Like it's almost like a concept of taking medicine. Like if I eat more whole grains, I will be healthier.
Right.
Whereas in reality, you're
Right.
probably not. So no, that's great. And if anyone has sort of this objections with the whole fat thing and the science, we've covered that in previous podcasts. Let me give two fresh new quotes here. This is coming from the chair of the Department of Nutrition at Harvard. Dr. Willett says, quoting, there is no good evidence linking dietary fat with excess weight. In fact, there's plenty evidence showing that the percentage of calories from fat is not the culprit leading to excess weight. And then Willett continues, in country-to-country surveys across Europe, women with the lowest fat intakes are the most likely to be obese, while those with the highest fat intake are the least likely. And then one more, a fellow researcher at Harvard, Dr. Hugh, makes a similar point, quoting, although a reduction in the percentage of calories from dietary fat intake is commonly recommended for weight loss, long-term clinical trials have provided no good evidence that reducing dietary fat per se can lead to weight loss. We've been misinformed, Carrie. We've just been simply misinformed.
I fucking feel myself getting mad again.
Oh, no. Did you just curse?
No.
Oh,
mad.
God.
I said mad.
Well, no, and another key point, just one other key point. So we've had a couple key points. One is don't fear fat. If you do, you'll actually end up overeating. Carrie's point is, and don't eat low-fat foods.
Because it
thinking
tastes
that they're healthy,
nasty.
and it tastes nasty, and it's not helping your health. In fact, it's actively hurting your health for the insulin reasons we talked about earlier. The other key takeaway is what we're not saying, go eat a stick of butter. I think I've said this a couple times already, but it's important that this is not go eat a low carbohydrate diet necessarily. The food guide pyramid and the My Plate that were given by the United States Department of Agriculture recommends that we get 65% of our calories from carbohydrate. And again, remember, carbohydrate is not bad, but to say that a diet that contains 65% carbohydrate is a balanced meal. Like, right, we see this picture on cereal boxes of a balanced breakfast. What's in that picture? Cereal, carbohydrate, milk, primarily carbohydrate, juice, carbohydrate, toast, carbohydrate. What is that?
Balanced about that?
There's no
Where's
balance.
the balance, people?
Like if we wanted balance, we might have an omelet, protein and fat, with some non-starchy vegetables, carbohydrate with a piece of with some berries, carbohydrate. That's balanced. That's delicious, and that's satisfying, and that's healthy. So it's not about high fat or high protein or high carbohydrate. It's just about being balanced. And another interesting way to look at the lack of balance is one. The average American eats a high carbohydrate diet, not a balanced diet, a high carbohydrate diet. So saying that you're going to slightly reduce the consumption of starches and sweets doesn't mean you're on a low carbohydrate diet. It actually means you're just trying to actually eat a balanced diet. And to put this into perspective, again, remember the USDA recommending 65% of our calories coming from carbohydrate. The Atkins diet, which has gotten a lot of press, and actually Dr. Atkins had to testify before the Senate for recommending what in the later phases of the diet amounts to be about a 65% fat diet. And the Senate got upset, or Congress got upset with Dr. Atkins for recommending such an unbalanced diet. How could you recommend you get 65% of your calories from fat? We know that a much more balanced diet is getting 65% of your calories from carbohydrate.
Which was just as unbalanced, just in a different direction.
Exactly. So,
well, we know that there's an agenda attached to the My Plate.
No,
I'll leave it at that. Otherwise, I will get upset.
And Carrie, to your earlier point about people being well-intentioned and doing things they think will help their health, and in fact harming their health instead, being such a tragedy. I have a statistic here from at this point, older edition of USA Today, but when I was writing the book, it was relatively recent. This came from the January 13th, 2011 edition of USA Today. They took one of their famous polls and found that 72% of Americans claimed to eat a balanced diet. And the implication in the article was like, you stupid Americans, how could 70% of you be overweight if 72% of you were eating a balanced diet? Well, Carrie, if the quote-unquote balanced diet is actually wildly out of balance, we absolutely could be eating a balanced diet and doing exactly what we've been told to do, but the result is disaster.
I mean, when 72% say they're eating a balanced diet, it's because they're being good boys and girls and they're looking at My Plate and that's what they're trying to eat. Absolutely. They think that's balanced.
Absolutely. So avoiding fat will not help you avoid overeating. In fact, it will cause you to overeat because it will cause you to avoid satisfying foods. And we've seen that in the data. If you express this to anyone else who is not familiar with this science, they'll probably say, well, but then again, eating fat will harm your heart, won't it? Well, in the last podcast, we talked through about $1 billion worth of scientific research that failed to show that, and in fact showed the opposite for certain types of fats, such as omega-3 polyunsaturated fats. Eating more of them actually reduces your risk of just about every form of disease. But the last objection you'll hear is, well, if I eat fat, won't that hurt my cholesterol? And that's the myth that we need to dispel next podcast. We need to talk about how eating fat will not hurt your cholesterol. And then I think
I'm the poster child for that.
Oh, yes.
You may be the poster child for just about everything else, but I lay claim to being the poster child for low cholesterol.
Well, excellent, folks. We've got some exciting things in store for you next week. We're going to put the nail in the coffin of hopefully lipophobia, which is the fear of fat, so that we can enjoy delicious, sane foods which contain fat, because natural foods contain fat. And we'll know that we can do that because the act of doing that will actually protect us from overeating automatically, because we'll be consuming high satiety foods, and we'll actually be healing our heart and helping ourselves to avoid all of these diseases of civilization we hear so much about. And we will actually help our cholesterol, not hurt it. And that's what we get into next week. You excited, Carrie?
Do we have to wait another week?
Do we have to wait another week? We do. We're out of time. Well, folks, thank you so much for joining us this week. Carrie Brown, Jonathan Bailor, eat more, exercise less, do it smarter. See you next week. Wait, don't stop listening yet. If you like the podcast and if there's other ways we can help you, please join us in the Smarter Science of Slim support group, which is freely available at the Smarter Science of Slim website, smarterscienceofslim.com. There you'll find all kinds of free recipes and success stories and just all kinds of fun stuff like how to help your kids go sane and just great community content.
And just one last thing before you go, if you wouldn't mind heading over to iTunes and up onto Amazon.com and leaving us a review, and then going over to Facebook and liking us, we would hugely appreciate it.